Welcome to the deep dive. So today we are ditching the wetsuits and grabbing our legal pads because we're diving into some legal cases.
Ooh, interesting.
Yeah, two cases actually. And don't worry, you don't need a law degree to follow along. We'll break it all down. First, we've got a class action lawsuit. It's about baby powder, believe it or not.
Yeah, it's always fascinating to see how these cases bring to light sort of the human side of the legal system, right?
Yeah.
Like we talk about a consumer product, baby powder, and then in the next case, it's like a life or death drama.
Right. Okay, so this first case is NSV Johnson & Johnson. And the excerpt you gave me, it's just a small piece of this much bigger lawsuit that was filed in British Columbia. And the plaintiff is claiming there's a link between using Johnson & Johnson's talc-based baby powder and developing ovarian cancer.
And that's where it gets interesting because, the legal strategies laid out in this document. And the plaintiff is arguing that there is enough scientific evidence to back up their claim. And they think, because there's so many potential claims, that a class action lawsuit is the most efficient way to go. And they're really pushing for British Columbia as the place for this case to be heard.
Okay, so they've got their arguments, but what about Johnson & Johnson? Are they just rolling over?
No, not at all. They are coming out swinging. Their legal team is basically saying, hold on, this link between talc and cancer, it's weak. They're also saying that each case of cancer, it's different. Everyone's experience is unique. So a class action lawsuit isn't really fair or appropriate. And get this, they want the case dismissed in British Columbia and moved to Ontario.
Wow, so it's a battle before the battle even really begins. It's like, where should this fight even happen?
Exactly. And what's really interesting is this excerpt, it gives us a peek into that. Like, they're arguing about which legal team is even equipped to handle a case this big. It's like a mini trial within the trial.
Oh, wow, that's interesting. And, from what I was reading, it seems like the judge had some thoughts on how the lawyers were handling things.
Oh, yeah, for sure. The judge actually calls out one of the lawyer's affidavits, like a sworn statement, right?
Yeah.
And the judge is basically saying it's full of stuff that's just not right, inappropriate arguments and hearsay. Like, for a judge to use the word inappropriate in an official document, that's pretty strong.
Yikes. Yeah, that's not good. It definitely sounds like things were getting a little heated in that courtroom.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It just shows you that law isn't always cut and dry. It's a lot about strategy, about almost like playing a game, even when the stakes are really high.
Totally. Okay, well, speaking of high stakes, let's move on to our next case, which sounds like something straight out of like a true crime podcast. We're talking murder at a dog show.
Ooh, okay.
Yeah. This excerpt is from the trial, RV, redacted, and it reads like a thriller, honestly. We've got shotguns involved, a mysterious vehicle, and a suspect who disappears for a while and then just reappears later on.
It's classic, isn't it? And what I find fascinating is how the prosecution is trying to put this puzzle together, this case, mostly using circumstantial evidence, eyewitness accounts, things they found at the crime scene, a possible motive. It's all got to line up just right.
Right, and the victim's wife, Eva, she's the only one who actually saw the shooter. She gave a description to the police and even worked with a sketch artist. But here's the thing. The defense is saying her story doesn't quite add up. They're pointing out things in her story that don't make sense. What the shooter looked like, the vehicle, that sort of thing.
That's the thing about eyewitness testimony. It's not as reliable as people think.
Mm.
Even the excerpt mentions that the sketch, the one they made based on Eva's description, it barely looks like the accused.
Right. It makes you wonder, she witnessed a shooting, her husband. It must have been terrifying. Could that have messed with her memory? And on top of that, the police found tire tracks, shotgun pellets, even gunshot residue at the scene. They're saying it all points to the accused.
But of course, the defense has something to say about that, too. They're saying all that evidence, it either doesn't mean anything or it doesn't match up with their client, the accused. There's this whole back and forth in the document about tire tracks, like the measurements didn't match the accused car at first.
Oh, really? So they almost got away with it just from that.
Yeah, it's possible. See, circumstantial evidence is tricky. You need all the pieces to fit perfectly, like a puzzle. But sometimes those pieces, they might be from a completely different puzzle, and you don't know it.
It's like those true crime documentaries. They always throw in some curveball right when you think you've got it all figured out.
Right, like plot twist. And this case definitely has those moments. Remember we were talking about the tire tracks? Well, it turns out the accused got his car windows tinted, like right after the shooting happened.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, I forgot about that. Didn't the prosecution try to say that was super suspicious?
Totally. They were like, he's trying to change how his car looks so no one will recognize it.
But I bet the defense had some explanation all lined up.
Oh, of course they did. They said he'd been wanting to tint his windows for ages, And it was just a total coincidence.
Classic. Like, oh, that, nothing to see here. Honestly, it's kind of funny how often that seems to happen in this case.
Right. Adds to the whole mystery for sure. And then there's the whole thing with him going to Macedonia, the accused, I mean. He takes off, like, not long after the shooting. The prosecution made a big deal out of that, saying he was skipping town.
Oh, yeah, like trying to escape or something?
Exactly. But the defense, they said, nope, he was going to visit his sister, planned it months ago.
Wow. So basically, every single thing the guy did around the time of the murder, they had some innocent explanation. Makes you think, could even totally normal things seem incriminating if you look at them the wrong way?
100%. It shows how important it is to look at all sides, all the evidence, before making up your mind. In this case, it all comes down to what the judge believes.
That's a tough job, deciding what's true and what's not.
Okay, well, let's switch gears back to the baby powder case for a minute. One thing that really stood out to me was how important the expert opinions are in that case.
Right, because it becomes this battle of the experts. The plaintiff brings in this doctor, Dr. Kramer, and he's saying, yeah, there's a connection between using talc and getting ovarian cancer. He's pointing to all these studies, like 8 of them, meta-analyses, I think they're called, and he's saying they prove a link statistically. So he's got these studies backing him up. What do Johnson & Johnson's experts say? Do they think the studies are wrong?
No, they're not saying the studies are wrong, but they're saying this Dr. Kramer, he's reading them wrong. Like he's not taking into account other things that can cause ovarian cancer. And they're saying his methods are sloppy, too general. Basically, yeah, those studies exist, but they don't prove what he's saying they prove.
It's like they're speaking the same language, science, but they're coming to totally different conclusions. No wonder these cases are so complicated.
Totally.
Yep.
And it's up to the judge to figure it all out, even if they're not a scientist themselves. They have to listen to the experts and decide who makes the most sense.
That's a big responsibility. And it makes me think about how much we rely on experts in general, right? For medical stuff, for legal stuff, everything.
Right. And these cases, they really show us that. Being an expert isn't just about knowing all the answers. It's about understanding all the little details, the things most people wouldn't even think about.
Yeah, and in a case like this, those little details, they can make a huge difference.
For sure. And it just goes to show you how much of this stuff is subjective, how people can look at the same evidence and walk away with completely different interpretations, even when we're talking about stuff like science.
It's kind of mind-blowing when you think about it that way. You know, as we're talking, something else just occurred to me. Remember how the defense in the murder case was saying the police were so focused on their client that they missed other clues? Tunnel vision, I think they called it.
Yeah, I remember that. What about it?
Well, do you think maybe the same thing could be happening in the baby powder case?
What do you mean?
Like, what if they're so convinced that the baby powder is what made them sick that they're not considering other things?
That's an interesting point. I mean, Johnson & Johnson is saying every cancer case is unique, right? So it's possible that some people could be blaming the baby powder when really something else was the cause.
Exactly. It just makes you wonder about finding that balance, you know? Like, trying to get justice for people who were maybe harmed, but also not jumping to conclusions too quickly.
Yeah, it's a tough line to walk. And it makes you think about the baby powder case, about Johnson & Johnson fighting so hard about where the case should be and whether it should even be a class action at all. Do you think they really believe that stuff, or is it just a strategy?
That's a good question. It's hard to tell, isn't it?
Totally. But it just shows you how sometimes the legal system, it can feel more about winning than about finding the truth.
It's like they're playing a game with people's lives.
Sometimes it feels that way, yeah. But we have to remember that it's a human system, it's going to have flaws, and it's up to all of us to keep pushing for fairness, for transparency.
That's a good point. Speaking of which, that lawyer in the baby powder case, the one the judge called out for that affidavit, that was pretty unusual, wasn't it?
Definitely. Most of the time, judges try to stay neutral. They don't want to seem like they're taking sides.
It's like the judge was saying, look, I get it. You've got to fight for your client, but there are lines you can't cross. What happens to a lawyer if they do something like that, ethically speaking? Like, are there consequences?
Oh, yeah, there can be. Depends on how bad it was, I guess. But they could get in trouble with the Bar Association, you know, the group that oversees lawyers. It could be anything from a slap on the wrist to, like, losing their license entirely if it's really serious.
Wow. So it's not just their client's case that's at risk. Their whole career could be on the line. It's a good reminder that even lawyers have to answer to someone, right?
Right. And it all circles back to what we were talking about before, how the law is made by people, so it's going to have flaws and weird stuff happen because people are involved.
For sure. Well, this has been really eye-opening looking at all this. We've talked about hard science and then eyewitness stories that might not be so reliable. We even talked about why lawyers make certain arguments, like is it strategy or do they actually believe it?
It just goes to show you how much goes on behind the scenes of these cases. We only see the tip of the iceberg, usually.
One of the biggest takeaways for me is how much of this legal stuff comes down to interpretation. Like, the experts have their opinions, the lawyers present it all in a certain way, and then the judge has to make sense of it all. It's all kind of subjective in a way.
Right. And that's why we need a system where everyone gets to say their piece, present their side. It's about hearing all those interpretations and then seeing how they measure up against each other.
It's like a puzzle where we don't even know what the picture is supposed to be yet.
Exactly. But even just looking at a few pieces, it's fascinating, right? Like, you get these little glimpses of the human side of it all, the stories, the drama, the fact that these aren't just abstract cases, it's about real people and their lives.
Well said. And on that note, I want to say thank you for walking us through all of this. Your insights have been amazing.
Happy to do it. These cases, they really make you think, and I'm always up for that.
And to everyone listening, we hope this deep dive has inspired you to think a little differently about the news, about these big legal battles. Every case has a story behind it, and those stories, they have a lot to teach us if we're willing to listen.
So next time you see a case in the news, don't be afraid to ask some questions. Challenge what you think you know. Do a little digging yourself.
Keep learning, keep asking questions, and keep diving deep. We'll be back soon with another deep dive. Until then, take care.